Just to give a little bit of background, I direct the Social Capital Project at the Resource Innovation Group, and we're focused on trying to understand and close the gap between why so many people care about the environment but don't act. We do a combination of research, training, and pilot projects. So the community that we really work with is the community of practitioners from nonprofits and government who are trying to engage the public in addressing climate and environmental issues. Today I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the challenges that those practitioners experience in doing their work, our response to it in launching the Climate Access Network, and then share two case studies that really illustrate the challenges that are happening on the ground. But I first want to just give a little bit of my background. I wish that I had not learned about best practices the hard way, but I did. And I started the Social Capital Project when I was Vice President of Communications at Earth Justice and found myself in the middle of several massive firestorms, political and media battles over successful litigation efforts. One case that shut down the world's largest fishery in the North Bering Sea, and another case that shut off water to farmers in the height of summer in the Klamath Basin, which turned into then the climate crisis, which many of you may have heard about. So in those instances, the litigation was rock solid. The legal facts were all there. That's why the lawyers won. The science was there. The agency's science was solid and was absolutely documented and articulated in the litigation. But we found ourselves in crisis communications mode because of our failure to understand the values, worldviews, and identities at play in the communities that these cases actually had an impact in. So we started to really try and take apart our model of environmental communications, which for the most part tends to be very top-down, very judgment-based, do this, do that, and also often void of people, nature without people in it, nature's protection for the sake of nature. And we started reconceptualizing our work and thinking of ways to work in advance in communities before litigation ever started, to try and understand and listen to local needs, to stop talking about biological opinions, fish counts, all of those details, and to use values-based narratives, and to put together very diverse and unexpected coalitions of stakeholders that could speak to the issues and create a new environmental identity. So from that, we actually started having quite a lot of success in turning these crisis situations around, and then wanted to get into how do we do this more. And we started really changing the way that Earth Justice worked. So word got out that we were having success in reframing environmental debates, and we were asked to lead an effort on behalf of 33 national organizations to create a meta-level framework for talking about climate change. So whether a group was focused on Native American rights, population issues, wildlife protection, clean water, mining issues, didn't matter. What would be the overall thematic framework that if we all were working within, we could develop mutually reinforcing narratives? Now that project was about 2 years long. It was an extensive amount of research, a lot of consensus building, and a lot of debate. But what we ended up doing was creating one of the largest studies on how to talk to the public about climate change. But what I realized is that was actually the easy part. And the challenging part was getting all of the groups who had asked us to actually do the work to use the framework. So that really drives a lot of what we're doing at the Social Capital Project today. We know a lot of things coming out of research. Why don't we apply it? And why aren't we learning from each other? So what we did then is, in creating this framework, we were then asked to go outside of the environmental community and share our research all across the United States and Canada. For the past 3 years, I've trained more than 3,000 practitioners in climate communications and behavior change. And in doing so, heard directly from people what their challenges are. And there are quite a few. The first is that often communicators are isolated in very technical organizations that don't actually understand or appreciate the role of communications or public engagement. As a result, they tend to never have the budget that they need to do the work effectively, and they're disconnected from each other. They don't necessarily have peers to talk to and learn from, let alone the fact that the entire media landscape is changing. the way that we communicate, our technologies, the way we're interacting with each other are fundamentally changing. So even the most seasoned communicators really don't have a good sense of what works anymore and what doesn't, and what the new model is. So a lot to unpack there. The other thing is that, and this is something that was mentioned earlier in the first presentation, a failure to really learn from each other, to stop repeating mistakes, and to actually amplify success. So our response to this challenge has been to create Climate Access, which is a network of networks for those doing climate communications and behavior change. And really what we heard from practitioners that they want is, number one, please synthesize and analyze the fire hose of information coming at us, both out of polling but out of the social sciences. Most people who are doing campaign work do not have the time to read any of the stuff that we put out, and yet they need the guidance. Secondly, the research is not enough. Oftentimes when we presented our work, people would say, fabulous, I completely get it, but show me how it's working out on the ground. Show me a campaign, show me what the tipping points are, because the research is not enough. I want to see the ideas in play. And finally, please connect me with other people, often within my own organization, within my own region, let alone with others across the country who might have something to share with me and that I can learn from. So the ways that we're addressing this in the Climate Access Network, first is around the synthesis and analysis. That's a big focus of ours. Doing blogging just to try and generate a conversation about that. We have a very extensive resource hub on our website that's searchable, that has almost every resource imaginable on the topic. But what we've done is to actually provide a cheat sheet for some of the most important ones. So if you don't have time to read the whole report, we provide a summary with the top takeaways for practitioners. And as you can see, one of our features right now is the report from last year's CBM conference. Another thing that we're doing is putting together collections of resources. So if you want to know about how to use storytelling best practices in your work, those resources are grouped together to make it easy to find. The most popular part of the website so far is our tips and tools section, where basically it is the cheat sheets, the dummy notes, the one-pagers that you could stick up in a cubicle to remind yourself of what the best practices are. And this is something we really hope to expand moving forward. Tracking what's going on the ground, that's something that we are doing, first of all, through our campaign gallery. So trying to track everything going on the ground in climate communications and behavior change. So any of your campaigns, please email me. We're happy to include them and feature what they're up to. And ultimately to start to drive some dialogues around what is working and what is not working on these issues. The network of networks. A lot of what's happening with climate access is not on the public side of our website. It is happening behind the scenes. We are screening all of our members into the network to ensure that they really are people working in the space who are qualified and who really need the resources. So behind the firewall is where a lot of the dialogue is happening, where groups can post comments, we can poll our members, we can make resources available that are not for public distribution, that are just for our members, and a network directory so that people can connect with each other. The site has only been live for about 4 months. We've screened more than 650 qualified practitioners into the network, so the demand is absolutely out there for this type of forum. One quick comment around the network of networks idea. So groups want to be part of the larger conversation, but sometimes they want to have their own conversation within their own network about their particular issues. So we do have a private network area that allows that to happen. They're still threaded into the larger climate access conversation, but this is where you can have private conversations, share resources just with your own network. We have 2 pilot groups working with us on this. One is Southeast US CAN Network, a network of about 45 advocates in the Southeast, and the Connect US Fund, which is a network of advocates working on peace and security issues as they're related to climate change. Just an example of the network directory. Been completely blown away by the type of people who have been coming into the conversation. So let me now turn to two quick case studies that really illustrate some of the challenges that the practitioner community is facing. One of them is from the David Suzuki Foundation, which I've had the pleasure to work with. And they were so struggling with what does all of the changes in the media landscape mean for us? What do we know from social sciences, that they started a project that was more than a year long, bringing in thought leaders, bringing together social scientists, and eventually creating a framework for themselves to really develop a whole new communications approach. And they call it the theory of change for public engagement. And the public engagement part is very important because they've actually made the distinction that communications informs, advocacy tries to compel people to do things, but engagement is a two-way exchange. And that's really driving a lot of what they're doing now. So for example, they started a very successful ambassador program where they're empowering people who are influential people within their own communities to represent the David Suzuki Foundation and represent the issues to their networks. It's worked so well that now they're going to apply this across all of their advocacy programs. And I think the real key is this is not about just reaching out to a community to say, what can you do for me? This is really about a process of co-creating the vision of what's needed by identifying the common ground. The next case study I'd like to quickly mention before I wrap up is from Resource Media, a group that I'm on the board of. And this was their attempt to develop a theory of change around their work using communications as a tool to influence environmental policy. This is a logic model that basically summarizes all of their work into one chart. Now, I'm not going to go into all of the details of this, but what I do want to point out is the thing that is interesting to me is actually what's missing on this chart. So what you can see is that Resource Media comes in to do the campaign work, the media work on campaigns. They think about the strategy, they find the right voices, they figure out the right partners, and they orchestrate that media conversation. The stories get in the newspaper, on TV, on the radio, and finally it successfully impacts policy. Now, to me, the challenge is that it's no longer straightforward that when you get coverage in the media, you're actually going to influence policy. What's also missing, though, is the top of the chart. What does this all add up to? What are we measuring? Are we just measuring our communications work based on we got a policy passed, we got a policy enforced, versus are we actually building new alliances that are powerful? Are we creating new frames that shift people's thinking about the issues? Are we tapping into the values landscape? So I think what you see here is a great need to rethink how we construct and measure our communications efforts. So we still have a lot of work to do with climate access to really get further into developing frameworks of what we know, what we need to know, to sort out measurement, as I've just mentioned, but we are making some progress. If we're successful, at the end of the day, we will have helped develop those mutually reinforcing narratives, not just within the environmental community, but across our community of practitioners, as well as find the success stories, the bright spots, amplify them, and ultimately get more coordination happening across campaigns so there's less duplication of efforts. So thank you very much. And just a quick shout out to our founding partners, Rutgers and Stonehouse Standing Circle. Thank you.